Hello, I'm Ed Murphy with the Astronomy Department at the University of Virginia, and this is Astronomy 1210, Introduction to the Sky and Solar System, Lecture 14, Eclipse Travels. In our last lecture, we saw what total solar and lunar eclipses are like and what some of the basic conditions are for them to happen. Now we're going to see what it's like to travel and see a total solar eclipse. As I said in the last lecture, this is something that has to be on your bucket list. You have to travel to see a total solar eclipse at some point in your life. My recommendation, don't wait. At the 2017 solar eclipse, I met hundreds of people. For most of them, it was their first total solar eclipse. For some of us, it was our second or third. I've met people who've been to 20 or 30 solar eclipses. The one thing I've never met is a person who saw one total solar eclipse and said, "That's it, I'm good, I'm done." Every single person I have ever met that has seen a total solar eclipse of the sun can't wait to see their next one. That's how spectacular these things are. You have to go see a total solar eclipse. Okay, so as I said, the subtitle for this lecture, or maybe the alternate title for this lecture, is Where Will I Be on April the 8th, 2024? I want you to take a very good look at this map. These are the total solar eclipses coming up in the next 20 years. You have one option in the continental United States, and that is April the 8th, 2024. And it sounds like I'm joking when I say I want you to put that on your calendar right now, but I want you to pause this lecture, and I want you to get your calendar out, and I want you to write April the 8th, 2024 on it. Block that day out. Block a few days before and a few days after. You're going to be traveling somewhere to see that eclipse. Go ahead, take a moment, do it now. The reason I'm not kidding about this is because of the experience that a lot of people had with the 2017 eclipse cutting across the continental United States. You'll remember this was the first total solar eclipse in the continental U.S. since 1979. More importantly, it was crossing over Interstate 95, which meant that people from all over the East Coast, in the north and the south, could take Interstate 95 to see the eclipse. On the day of the eclipse, the state of South Carolina was expecting as many as 1 million day visitors just driving into the state for the day. On top of all of that, people had started realizing many years ago that this eclipse was going to be popular. Hotel chains were selling out of hotel rooms years in advance. Tour companies were clever enough to buy up large blocks of rooms many years in advance. If you waited until a year before the eclipse to try and block a hotel room in one of the places where the eclipse was going on, it was almost impossible to get a hotel room. On the day of the eclipse, as I'll show you in a little while, there were traffic jams up and down the East Coast, anywhere close to the path of totality. People trying to get in to see the eclipse and people trying to get out to see the eclipse. It takes some planning. So look at this map and think to yourself, what parts of the world would you like to go see? What parts of the world do you want to explore that you may not have otherwise explored, but you would because you're going there to see a total solar eclipse? And I will share some of my journeys with you, going to places that I wouldn't have thought to go to simply because there was an eclipse there. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about my personal eclipse journeys. I have spent a total of 12 minutes and 8 seconds standing in the shadow of the moon. It's by most standards, by people who go and see eclipses, it's not a very impressive total. As I said, I've met people who have been to 20 and 30 solar eclipses. They have literally spent hours inside the shadow of the moon. But I think given the fact that most people have spent hardly any time, or probably no time in the shadow of the moon, 12 minutes and 8 seconds is a pretty impressive total. I've seen 3 total solar eclipses. One on March 29th, 2006 in the Mediterranean Sea. I was in the shadow of the moon for 3 minutes and 54 seconds. Once on July 22nd, 2009 in Anji, China, where I was in the shadow of the moon for 5 minutes, 38 seconds. And then on August 17th, 2017 near Columbia, South Carolina, where I was in the shadow of the moon for 2 minutes and 36 seconds. So let's take a look at what happens during an eclipse and what you will see. So these are the eclipses that I have seen. Let's start, first of all, by using Stellarium to simulate an eclipse. And what we'll do is we'll simulate the August 21st, 2017 eclipse inside Stellarium. So let me go ahead and bring up Stellarium here to show you what you can expect to see during a total solar eclipse. Okay. Bring Stellarium over here where you can see it. Let me maximize it right there. All right. Bring up my location window and my date and time window. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to show you what the eclipse looked like where I was located, which was very near Columbia, South Carolina. So let me type in Columbia, South Carolina. There it is. And so I'm going to click on it. And you'll see down here in the corner, it's changed my location to Columbia, South Carolina. So that is good. And you will remember that that eclipse was on August the 21st, 2017. Okay. And now I need to go to the middle of the day. So let's go back to about noon there. So August the 21st, 2017. It's a little bit after noon in Columbia, South Carolina. If you looked up there in the sky and saw the sun up there in the sky, right next to the sun up there in the sky was the moon. Now, in real life, you're not going to see the moon like this. The sun is much too bright. You're not going to see the moon. In Stellarium, we can see the shadow of the moon. So what I want to do here is I'm going to just focus on the sun here and lock it in my center of the field of view. And let's go see what happened as time went on. So minute by minute, 12, 17, 18, minute by minute, the moon started moving closer and closer and closer to the sun until just after 1 o'clock, not long after 1 o'clock, the moon started to pass in front of the sun. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit here to show you what happened. So the moon started passing in front of the sun. These were the partial phases. This was where, if you were using your glasses to look up at the sun, you could see the sun looking like this. You could see a bite taken out of the sun. And minute by minute by minute, more and more of the sun was disappearing as the moon passed in front of it. So this partial phases here took a bit more than an hour, a fair bit more than an hour for the moon to pass in front of the sun there. And so this whole time we were using eclipse glasses to look at the sun. We were using other safe techniques for looking at the sun as well. But I'm going to slow this back down now as we get close to totality here. As you get close to totality, the sun takes on the appearance of a very, very thin crescent up there in the sky. And once the sun starts looking like a thin crescent, all kinds of cool effects start happening, and I'll show you some of those in a few minutes here. But the other thing that starts happening is the world starts getting dark around you. The planets come out. The planets Venus and Jupiter become visible because they're the two brightest planets in the sky. During totality, it gets dark enough that some of the brightest stars are visible. But what happens next is minute by minute, as the moon continues to cover the sun. Let me speed this up just a little bit here. Just center that up. Minute by minute, the moon covers the sun, and at the moment of totality, the moon covers the sun. You see the beautiful outer atmosphere of the sun called the corona, and it gets dark enough out that you can not only see the brightest planets, but you can also sometimes see some stars. And in this case, in my case, for 2 minutes and 36 seconds, the moon covered the sun, and almost as quickly as it begins, the moon moves on and the sun starts to recover and a little sliver of sunlight appears. Wherever you plan to see the 2024 eclipse, you can go into Stellarium and you can simulate what you will see during that eclipse. And I highly recommend that you do it. All right, so let's talk about my eclipse trips for a second, just because it's a great chance for me to show you some of my vacation photos. The first one I saw was this one on March the 29th, 2006. The shadow of the moon started right here on the east coast of South America. It cut across the central Atlantic, hit land again in Central Africa, came up through North Africa, out over the Mediterranean Sea, out through Turkey, the Black Sea, and then out over the former Russian republics there. And so this is what the path of the totality looked like. So this was an interesting question as to where I would go see this eclipse. There were a number of choices. You could see it in far western Egypt. That was one option. At the time, Libya, when we were planning to see this trip, Libya and the United States were still on unfriendly terms. United States citizens were not welcome to visit Libya. But not long before the eclipse happened, those relations thawed a bit, and some Americans did go to Libya to see the eclipse. Other places in Central Africa were difficult to get to. Many of them were dangerous, in fact, to get to. The Mediterranean Sea was a good option. I'll show you a great option for that in a minute. But many people saw it on the south coast of Turkey here, especially in Antalya. The city of Antalya was right along the center line. So a good place to see totality up through Turkey and then the Black Sea and then up further. So my family and I decided to go see this one by taking a cruise on the Costa Cruise Lines. And so this was a cruise specifically for observing the total solar eclipse. The cruise started in Genoa, Italy. And after Genoa, we had a stop in Rome. And after Rome, sailed through the Straits of Messina and went to Alexandria, Egypt, and then visited Cyprus, came over to the island of Rhodes, visited Antalya, Turkey. And that was the day before the eclipse. And on the day of the eclipse, the captain of the cruise ship sailed southwestward directly along the center line of the eclipse. And he did this for two reasons. The first reason he did it is the eclipse was slightly longer down here. It was, you can see the maximum eclipse was 4 minutes and 7 seconds here. Up here, it was just 3 minutes and 42 seconds. So every mile that we could get down here made the eclipse last a little bit longer. That was one reason we sailed southwest. Another reason that we sailed southwest like this was that the weather forecast for the southern Mediterranean was a little bit better than it was up here in the northern Mediterranean. So the captain sailed as fast as he could along the eclipse line, and we were down here when we intercepted the sun. When we intercepted the shadow of the moon. That's where we saw the eclipse, actually on the cruise ship right there. So I took my whole family on this trip. These are my two sons, Max and Michael. They're much older now, of course. They're both in college now, but there they are holding up the cruise ship. A fantastic thing about seeing this total solar eclipse was the opportunity to do things that I'd never had the chance to do before. So, for example, when we were in Egypt, we were able to get a bus to go visit the pyramids in Cairo, outside Cairo. Really fascinating story about this. I won't dwell on it very long, but it's a great picture of us riding camels at the pyramids. And I will just tell you that the story behind this is that it costs absolutely nothing to get on a camel at the pyramids. But before you get on that camel, you need to be sure to negotiate the price to get off the camel. There's a great story behind that. I'll share it with you some other time. But in the minutes leading up to the eclipse, this is one of my sons, this is Max, and the room keys for the rooms on the boat had little tiny holes punched in the room keys. And as the sunlight shone through those little tiny holes, you can see all these little crescent suns. They look like crescent moons, but as you can see, we're out here in full daylight. Those are little crescent suns shining through the little holes in the key card. So as you're going through those partial phases while you're trying to occupy yourself, I'll show you more pictures of this in a little while. Find things that have little holes in them so that you can see the little crescent suns. Now, during these partial phases, you're going to be using eclipse glasses like this. So the first thing to know is the sun during a total solar eclipse is no dangerous than it is at any other time. If you go out tomorrow and you stare at the sun, you will permanently and immediately damage your eyes. That is, staring at the sun through a pair of binoculars, through a telescope, or for a long period of time with your naked eye will permanently damage your eyes. So the only safe way to see an eclipse is using something like a pair of eclipse shades like this. And by the way, you can use these to observe the sun at any time. They're not just for eclipses. You can use them to observe the sun anytime. But the primary reason that most people want to observe the sun is during a total solar eclipse. These eclipse glasses, they typically make them inexpensively out of cardboard. They have a special polymer plastic film right here that blocks all of the harmful ultraviolet, all of the harmful infrared, and blocks most of the visible light. And so they allow you to comfortably and safely view the eclipse with your naked eye. You cannot use eclipse glasses like this to look through a telescope or a pair of binoculars. They will not protect you looking through a telescope or binoculars. They are literally just for putting on and looking up at the sun. Now, a couple things about eclipse shades. 2 years before the eclipse, you will find them for sale for about $1 a piece. My recommendation is at that point, buy as many as you can afford. In the 2017 eclipse, about 6 months before the eclipse, they were completely sold out everywhere in the United States, and people were paying a huge premium for these eclipse glasses. And then a few weeks before the eclipse, it turns out that many people who had bought glasses bought them from irreputable dealers that were not reputable, and it wasn't clear whether they were actually safe or not. And Amazon sent out a warning to thousands upon thousands of people who had bought glasses from Amazon that they should not use their glasses. But it was so late that these people couldn't find other glasses to use. So my recommendation is a couple years, 2 years before the eclipse, at least a year, but probably 2 years before the eclipse, buy a bunch of eclipse glasses. Buy as many as you think you'll need. Obviously, you're only going to need one pair. Your family might need a couple pairs. Buy a few dozen or maybe a few hundred extra pairs for your friends who are going to procrastinate and wait to the last minute. Buy them from a reputable dealer. There are many reputable dealers out there. You can often find them in magazines like Astronomy Magazine or Sky and Telescope Magazine. Astronomy Magazine and Sky and Telescope magazines publish online reviews. You can read their reviews. But there are a number of reputable companies. I can say that I have bought glasses from a company called Rainbow Symphony many times, and I really like their glasses, and they're a reputable dealer. So you can look for Rainbow Symphony. Make sure that the glasses have an ISO safety certification. Inside the glasses will be printed an ISO safety certification, and this means that they have passed a test. Now, obviously, some of the irreputable dealers, they're going to go ahead and print a safety certification in there. So that's why you buy them from a reputable dealer that has paid the safety certification company to certify their glasses, and they agree to abide by the assessment standards or the accounting standards of the safety organization to make sure that all their glasses are safe. So what's the sun going to look like through these eclipse glasses? Well, the sun is going to look like this. It's going to look like a little orange ball up there in the sky, and it's going to have a big bite taken out of it. That's the moon. There's not a whole lot to see through the eclipse glasses. The primary goal for the eclipse glasses is watching the progress of the total solar eclipse, watching minute by minute by minute as the moon starts to pass in front of the sun. And I have to say, it takes more than an hour, and at first it might sound a little bit tedious, but it's really quite exciting because you've probably been waiting years to get to this moment when the eclipse is going on. And everybody cheers in that first moment when the first little bite gets taken out of the sun. And then as more and more the sun disappears, anticipation rises and rises because you realize that this thing you've been waiting for years is coming up in just a few minutes. So it's actually one of my favorite parts of the eclipse. I think the partial phases leading into the eclipse are really quite wonderful because of that buildup of anticipation. All right, so the moon is going to cover the sun slowly. The last few seconds, just before the moon covers the sun, are fascinating because in the last few seconds, little glints of sunlight will be shining through valleys and craters on the surface of the moon. And they will form a series of beads like this called Bailey's beads. And then at the very, very last moment, there will be one Bailey's bead left. And at that moment, you get a spectacular effect called the diamond ring effect. Now, I have to say, before going to my first total solar eclipse, I didn't know what to expect from the diamond ring effect. I'll tell you another story about this eclipse in a second, but I have to say with the diamond ring effect, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't think it was going to be that spectacular. I was completely wrong. What happens in the diamond ring is literally a few seconds before the moon covers the sun. The last little bit of sunlight is shining through the last valley on the surface of the moon. But the corona, the outer atmosphere of the sun, is just becoming visible. And it takes on this spectacular diamond ring look. This is the ring, and the last bit of sunlight is a diamond. But this photograph doesn't do it justice. That last little spectacular sparkle of sunlight that's shining across the limb of the moon is just beautiful. It's scintillating. It is sparkling. It's a really amazing sight to see. So another great thing about my very first eclipse trip, which is this one that we're talking about right now in 2006, was that I had never seen a total solar eclipse before. I had lectured about it for many, many years here at UVA. I had known what to expect. I read every book that I could read on total solar eclipses, and I took a piece of paper and I wrote on that paper, literally second by second, everything that I should look for during the total solar eclipse. I wrote on there what time the eclipse would begin, what I should look for. There's all kinds of special effects that happen during eclipses, like diamond rings and Bailey's beads and other things called shadow bands that race across the surface of the ground. And I wrote all of these down on my list of things that I should look for during the total solar eclipse. And I'll tell you more about that list in a few minutes. But in any case, we're still leading up to the totality. People often ask, how will I know when totality comes? And I think the answer to that is that you will know, right? This is one of those things that you will know. In this first eclipse, we were on the deck of a cruise ship. And what I have to describe is that about 15 minutes before totality or so, if you looked to the southwest where the shadow of the moon was coming from, something weird was going on with the sky. The sky all around us was bright blue, and there were some clouds up there, but for the most part, the sky was bright blue. But when you looked to the southwest, there was this ominous darkness. That was the shadow of the moon, stretching all the way from the moon down to the surface of the earth. And over the next 15 minutes, that giant shadow got bigger and bigger and bigger as it was racing across the surface of the ocean towards us. And just a few minutes before totality, it was amazing. When you look to the southwest, instead of blue sky, there was literally this dark cylinder, which was the shadow of the moon. And you could see the darkness racing across the surface of the ocean at 1,000 miles an hour coming towards us. When totality happens, it is literally like someone turns out the lights. Because even during the diamond ring, when there's just a tiny little bit of sunlight, enough sunlight gets past the moon that everything around you is still lit up. But the moment that the moon completely covers the sun, it's like a dark curtain has been put over the world. Everything gets dark. It's really quite amazing. And then during totality, you get to see the corona, this outer atmosphere of the sun. Also, I have to argue, spectacularly beautiful. The thing about the corona is it's really bright close to the sun, and it's really faint far from the sun. And there are all kinds of loops and whirls and streamers in there. And it's actually really hard for a camera to capture that because the inner regions are so bright. In order to capture them, you have to underexpose the film, and all the details out here don't show up. To capture the details out here, the inner details are overexposed. It turns out your eye doesn't suffer from this problem nearly as much as a digital camera does. Your eye can actually see the inner bright part and the faint outer part at the same time. Now, the corona is a million degree atmosphere on the sun. That is, the temperature of this outer atmosphere is 1 to 2 million degrees, but it is very, very thin. And this corona, this thin outer atmosphere of the sun, is only visible during a total solar eclipse. Now, Fred Espenek, who took this picture, processed it to show you what it looks like with the eye. And this is probably one of the best depictions I have seen of what the corona looks like. And all of those details that you can see, here's another photograph of it. All of those details, those streamers that you can see here, these loops, all of those are real. They come from the sun's magnetic field. The sun has a north and a south magnetic field, so you can see the magnetic field coming out, and then you can see these giant magnetic loops and whirls on the sun. During totality, it is perfectly safe to remove your glasses. In fact, you have to remove the glasses because the sun has now gotten so dim that that you're not going to see anything with the glasses on. So as soon as totality hits, you take those safe solar glasses off, and now it is perfectly safe to stare at the sun. And people will say, how will I know when I need to put my glasses back on? Don't worry, it'll be completely obvious. The first second that even a little bit of sunlight reaches around the edge of the moon, the sun will become incredibly bright, and at that moment you just need to look away quickly and then put your sunglasses, your solar eclipse glasses back on. You've only got a few minutes during totality, and there's a lot of things you want to do during totality. My recommendation is print a star map before you go, because not only do you want to see the corona and look for all the details in the corona, but you want to look to see how many planets can you see. Can you see any stars in the sky up there? If you look very closely around the rim of the moon right here, sometimes you will see little red prominences from the surface of the sun poking up over the limb of the moon. In order to see those, you can even use a pair of binoculars to do that, but you have to be really careful because you're not going to use any filter on the binoculars, and you don't need to because the moon is blocking the surface of the sun. But you want to do that in the middle of totality and not the beginning or the end when there's any chance that the sunlight would get in the binoculars. So do it right in the middle of totality. You want to look at the world around you. What does the world look like? And you've got only a couple minutes to do this. And I can tell you, I've only been in 3 total solar eclipses, but time just absolutely flies by. You may look at your watch and say, I have 2 minutes and 36 seconds to enjoy this. It goes by like that. So make sure you know what you want to do during totality. Have a plan, because it's just going to whisk right by. So here's a really nice summary of what a total solar eclipse looks like. So you have the partial phases leading into totality and then coming out of the partial phases there. Here's another spectacular corona picture showing you the corona. This one is nice because it shows a little prominence right there on the sun. So if you look, you can see a little prominence sticking up on the sun right there. Piece of advice during your first total solar eclipse: do not try and photograph the total solar eclipse. And the reason is this: you've only got a couple minutes to enjoy one of the greatest spectacles in all of nature. Don't spend that time screwing around with your camera. Leave the photography to experts like this. These are people who've been to 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 total solar eclipses. They've been there, they've done that, and now they're spending their time photographing the eclipse. And the day after the eclipse, they are going to put all their spectacular photographs on the internet. And you can download all those, put those in your photo album, and remember the eclipse with that. But on your very first total solar eclipse, do not waste the time to photograph it. It is too beautiful to miss. And I'm serious about this. Do not waste the time. This, by the way, is in northern Libya during that 2006 eclipse. Here's another group that are photographing the eclipse. You can see from her T-shirt right there that she's been to at least a couple different eclipses. So what's it like during totality? Well, this is in Turkey during the 2006 eclipse. This is what it looked like before totality. This is what it looked like during totality. It really does get dark. It gets almost as dark as night. But what's amazing is all around the horizon out there, you see the orange glow that looks like sunrise and sunset. And that's because the sun is still shining out there. And when you're in the middle of the shadow, that sunlight is shining all around you. Now, I want to talk about another total solar eclipse here for a second. It was a total solar eclipse that happened fairly recently. Let me show you the one that I'm going to talk about here. And because there's an amazing story behind it and even more amazing video behind it. So in 2016, on March the 9th, 2016, the shadow of the moon cut across the Pacific Ocean for the most part. It was mostly out over the Pacific Ocean right here. So it cut across Indonesia and then out over the Pacific Ocean and then far north of Hawaii. This was a good total solar eclipse. The problem with it was, other than in Indonesia, there was no place to see the eclipse, right? Even though it looks like you're just north of Hawaii here, there are no cruise ships that are going to cruise out to this eclipse path out here because you are 1,000 miles away from Hawaii. And that would mean that the cruise ship would have to spend many, many days sailing there and many, many days sailing back. And those would be many days at sea where you couldn't visit a port. And of course, cruise companies, frankly, they make a lot of their money on port calls, and so it wasn't very lucrative for them. So a lot of people, well, hardly anyone was going to get to see this eclipse out here over the Pacific. But a meteorologist by the name of Joe Rao, who lives in Boston, Massachusetts, noticed that this eclipse, this eclipse was halfway between Alaska and Hawaii. And he realized that Alaska Airlines and Hawaii Airlines, particularly Alaskan Airlines, has a lot of flights that fly back and forth between Alaska and Hawaii. And so he looked at their flight schedule and realized that on the day of the eclipse, March 9th, 2016, there was a flight leaving Alaska that would get to this part of the world just before the eclipse was happening. And so he realized that he needed to get the airline to change the date and time, or change the time of the flight just a little bit so that they could be there for the eclipse. So he calls up Alaska Airlines and he says, look, on this flight on this day, I want you to change the time of the flight a little bit so that it can be in the shadow of the moon for this eclipse. And of course, as you can imagine, if you call an airline and ask them to do that, you're not going to get anywhere. But he was an on-air meteorologist at a TV station in Boston, and he had some connections. And eventually he was able to connect with an executive at Alaska Airlines who said, this is a great idea. We've got to do this. So they ended up changing the time of the flight, and they ended up selling most of the seats on the flight to people who were there not to fly from Alaska to Hawaii, but to see the eclipse. And one gentleman on the flight took a video of the eclipse, which I think is one of the greatest total solar eclipse videos ever. It's great for two reasons. It's great because of the eclipse, and it's great because of this guy's reaction. So let me play this clip for you right here.
Shadow coming in.
Oh yeah, there it is. There's the shadow. Wow, look at that. Here it comes. Oh my God, look at it. Here comes the shadow. Look at that. It's like a tornado.
So before I let this continue, let me show you what's going on in the video. So we've got the sun up here in the sky. He's photographing out the window of his airplane. And if you look off in the distance here, you can see, so remember the moon is right here almost in front of the sun. You can see the shadow of the moon coming down to the surface of the earth. In a minute, as it creeps closer to the airplane, you will actually see the round shadow of the sun on the surface of the earth. The other thing to keep in mind about this video is that this guy that's videotaping this is not his first eclipse. Listen to how excited he is to see this eclipse, and this is not his first eclipse.
Oh my God, here we go. Here we go. Oh my God. Oh my God. Here we go. Look at this. Oh my God, it's coming. The moon's shadow is coming. It is coming. Oh my God, here it comes. Look at this. I've never seen it like this, ever. Only in a plane. No flashes. Oh my God, here we go.
Look at that round shadow. Isn't that amazing?
Whoa. Look at that. Oh my God. Here we go. Oh my God. It's coming right over us like a storm. Look at this. Oh my God. We're getting close. Getting close. No filter. Oh my God. Corona. There it is. Diamond Belly's beads. Belly's beads diamond ring. Look at that. Corona. Totality. Totality. Oh my God. Look at that. Totality. Oh my God. Look at those streamers. Look at the crumbs. It's all prominences. Look at that. Prominences. Look at the moon. Red all around. Full shadow. Completely elongated. Oh my God. Look at that. Look at that streamer. 7 o'clock. Prominences. 12 o'clock. 2 o'clock. 10 o'clock. Streamers. Look at that. Elongated. Oh my God. Look at that. Absolutely amazing. Oh my God. Totality. Oh, look at that. Oh my God. Wow. Wow. Look at that.
I'm going to pause it here for a second to point out you can already see the eclipse lifting. If you've been watching the horizon down here, you can see that the shadow has already disappeared and the sunlight is creeping back in. And back here you can see the back edge of the shadow of the moon.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Incredible shadows on the left side now, so you can see across the Pacific the entire shadow stretching across the ocean.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Absolutely gorgeous. Look at that curved shadow. Look at that. Look at it coming
Now
to
look
light.
at the shadow.
Oh my
Look
God.
at the shadow racing
Passing
across
right in
the ground
shadow of the moon.
over 1,000
Look at
miles
that.
an hour.
So look at those prominences. You can see them with your naked eye. This chromosphere. Look at that. Here comes the shadow. It's lifting up. It's going out. It's going out. Going up to the atmosphere. Oh, look at down there. Light. Oh, what is it? It's beating. Oh, that's a flare. Look at that diamond ring. Look at that. Oh my God. Diamond ring. Wow. Look at that. Oh my God. Wow.
And that wasn't his first eclipse. And he was still that impressed by what he was seeing. You have to go see a total solar eclipse. All right, in 2017, a group of students launched a high altitude balloon, and they took this photograph of the shadow of the moon. This was out west, and that is, you can again see the shadow of the moon down on the earth down there. Going back to my eclipse back in 2006, here's a photograph of the shadow of the moon on the earth. This is actually the island of Cyprus right here, and so north is down at the bottom. So they were taking this photograph from the International Space Station, and the Earth is, we would call it upside down, with north down at the bottom and south at the top right here. What's really cool about this photograph, that's the shadow of the moon, and I'm just off the edge of the picture up here somewhere on a cruise ship in that picture. So that was just after totality had passed over us. And here's a picture from an eclipse back in 1991, where a weather satellite photographed the shadow of the moon at various points as it cut across the United States. It missed the continental United States. It did go over the big island of Hawaii, but went over the southern tip of Baja in Mexico, over central Mexico, right over Mexico City, and then down out over Central and South America. My second eclipse trip, I told you I was going to show you my vacation photos. My second eclipse trip was in 2009, and it was with a program here at the University of Virginia called Cavalier Travels. The Cavalier Travels program is where friends of the university and alumni will travel with a faculty member to some interesting part of the world. And I was fortunate enough to be able to take this group of people to China to see a total solar eclipse in July of 2009. So most of the people that you see here, well, they were all on the trip for the Cavalier Travels trip. Most of them were alumni of the university, and then some of them were children of alumni and other friends. We happened to see it from a place called Anji in just west of Hangzhou, China, a couple hours west of Hangzhou, China. And we got to tour all over China in the days leading up to the eclipse. On the day of the eclipse, we drove up into these mountains on a reservoir here, and thousands of people, the Chinese Academy of Sciences had decided that this was the best place to observe the eclipse from. And so they had arranged eclipse viewing here for thousands of us. We're all gathered together to see the eclipse. What's going on at this moment in time, you can see someone holding a pair of eclipse glasses right there. You can see a solar telescope with a special solar filter on it that allows you to safely use the telescope to look at the sun. Someone here is holding up a fan that has little tiny pinholes in it. It's one of those paper fans that has cutouts in it, and we were looking at the sunlight passing through the pinholes, making little crescent suns on a chair back right there. One of the things that was fascinating about this eclipse was it happened to be a particularly long eclipse. It was the maximum duration of totality was about 6 minutes long. Where we were, it was about 5.5 minutes, if I remember, of totality is what we got. Before the eclipse, we were walking up and down the line here telling everybody, especially everybody from our UVA group, do not take any flash photographs during totality. And the reason we said that is that everybody had traveled thousands of miles to see this total solar eclipse, and they did not want their precious few minutes of totality destroyed by someone taking a flash photo. Well, as always, someone wasn't paying attention or they forgot to turn the flash off. And so during the middle of totality, they took a flash picture of all of us looking at the sun. We yelled at them at the time. They were properly castigated for that. But I'm glad that they did, because it shows you how dark it got. That is what it looked like during totality. This is the middle of the day. It got so dark during this. This was the darkest of the three eclipses I've seen. This one was by far the darkest. It got so dark that I wanted to read my watch to determine when totality was going to end, and it was too dark for me to read my watch. But you can see everybody staring at the eclipse. So we are in the middle of totality. So I'm using a pair of binoculars here to look at the sun. I don't have any filters on the binoculars. A couple of people trying to photograph totality. Our UVA banners hung over the sides of the chairs, completely forgotten there. So that is the 2009 eclipse in China. Had a spectacular visit to the country of China and got to see a really amazing total solar eclipse. And then my third eclipse, of course, was it's called the Great American Eclipse on August the 21st, 2017, because it was only visible from the United States. It was visible out over the Pacific, visible out over the Atlantic, but the only country that it visited that totality visited was the United States. And it was visible from coast to coast, literally across the United States. There were a lot of choices as to where to go see this. I had seriously considered going to Southern Illinois, Carbondale, where I could see the eclipse in 2017, but see the eclipse again in 2024, stand in one spot and see 2 total solar eclipses in the period of 6.5 years. But it turns out the date, August 21st, 2017, was a bit inconvenient. Classes at UVA began on August 22nd, 2017, and I had to teach a class on August 22nd at 9:30 in the morning. Now, normally, I would have told the students, look, this is too important. I'm just going to miss class. But it turns out that was the first class of the semester, and you really don't want to miss the first class of the semester. So I decided that I was going to see the eclipse, and as soon as the eclipse was over, I was going to drive from South Carolina to Charlottesville, and then sleep and get up and teach my class. More about that in a minute, but I learned a valuable lesson there. But in any case, I decided that the best place to go see it was in South Carolina. And in particular, I saw it just west of Columbia, South Carolina, on the edge of a lake here at a camp called Camp Barstow. So one of the things I do in my time that I'm not at UVA is I volunteer with the Boy Scouts of America, and I put on a program for the Boy Scouts at Camp Barstow in South Carolina. So it's a Boy Scout summer camp down there. And we ran a couple days of astronomy merit badge leading up to the eclipse. And then we had a huge big viewing party for the eclipse itself. We had hundreds of people there to see the eclipse, and dozens upon dozens of scouts worked on all kinds of merit badges in the days leading up to it. Had lots of fun at this trip. Here was a really great idea that some of the kids came up with. So one of the problems that you'll find out after your first total solar eclipse is you spend a lot of time staring at the sun with those eclipse glasses on. And at the end of the day, you will have sunburn all over your face, and then you will have a stripe with no sunburn because you were wearing those glasses. And so I warned people that you'll either need to put a lot of sunscreen on, or what these kids did was they took paper plates and they mounted their safety glasses, their solar glasses, in the paper plates. This young woman's going to have to worry about a little bit of sunburn on her chin there and that one on her nose. But I thought this was a really cute idea for covering up your face to protect your face. On the day of the eclipse, we had safe solar telescopes out. So this is an example of a telescope that had a big solar filter mounted on the front. Here's another telescope that has the filter built into it. Here was a telescope that was actually projecting the sun on a piece of plastic. I'll show you that in a minute. Here's a great little solar telescope. I love this one called the Sun Spotter. It's shaped like a triangle. And there's a lens right here, and the sunlight comes in the lens, bounces off a mirror, bounces to another mirror, bounces up to a third mirror, and it projects the light on a piece of paper. And it's a great way to show kids the sun because it's a perfectly safe way to see the sun. They're not using their eye to look directly at the sun. They're just looking at sunlight shining on a piece of paper, which is perfectly safe to do. And it's a great safe way. And you can see the sun looking like a thin crescent there in the minutes before totality. Here's another telescope that's projecting it on a piece of plastic film, and you can see the sun looking like a little tiny thin crescent. Again, just minutes before totality. And then one of the things I did was I poked a bunch of holes in a piece of paper, and you can see the sunlight shining through the little holes in the piece of paper right there. You can see all these little thin crescent suns. As impressive as that was, the most impressive thing I saw was we walked over to a nearby tree, and all the leaves on the trees were making thousands of little pinholes. And as the sunlight shone through those thousands of little pinholes, it made thousands of little crescent suns on the ground. Absolutely spectacular. We had a beautiful day, completely, as you can see, maybe in some of the photographs there, crystal clear skies. We got a great view of the eclipse. When the eclipse was over, most everybody packed up and left, but I insisted on staying until the very end of the partial phases. I figured that would give the traffic a little bit of time to clear, and then it was time to head home. And that was where the problems began. Because so many people had traveled to the path of totality to see the eclipse, as soon as the eclipse was over, everybody was trying to get home. It took me about 8 hours to drive from Charlottesville to Columbia, South Carolina. It took about 13 hours to drive home. In the end, I ended up driving all night and getting back to Charlottesville about 7 o'clock in the morning after staying up driving all night for my 9:30 class. So I made it to class that day. So don't ever think you have to miss class. Even I made it to class that day. I'm sure I was a little tired, but I was more than excited. We spent that whole first day just talking about the eclipse and what I saw. I cannot wait to see the eclipse in 2024. I haven't decided where I'm going yet. I hope to be able to get another Cavalier Travels trip together. I would love to take a bunch of alumni and students and friends from UVA to go see the eclipse. If that doesn't work, I might look for another Boy Scout camp to do it. My guess is right now that based on weather predictions and other factors, I will probably go down to Texas to see it. Let me go back to the first slide here. I think that's probably the best one here. I apologize for all the text that's blocking the view right there. Hang on for a second. I can get rid of that for a second. Okay. So down here in Texas, especially Southwest Texas, the totality, the longest period of time for the eclipse here, longest eclipse is going to be down here in Mexico. Because this is Monday, April the 8th, I'll probably have to get back for teaching class at UVA fairly quickly, so I probably won't go down to Mexico to see it. But down here in southwestern Texas, the eclipse is almost as long, and the weather forecast looks quite good down here in Texas. As you go further towards the northeast, the weather forecast gets worse and worse. Remember, this is April, so you'll remember the old saying that April showers bring May flowers, and so we have lots of rain in the springtime, especially up here in the northeast. But that said, regardless of where you are, find someplace along this path of totality and go there. I also recommend that on the day of the eclipse that you have a backup plan. If it's cloudy where you are, but if it's going to be clear 100 miles away, get up early on the morning of the eclipse, get in your car and drive someplace clear, but be ready for all the traffic. I hope to see you at the 2024 eclipse. Don't miss it. But whatever you do, make sure that you see a total solar eclipse at some point in your life. And if you do, write me an email and let me know. That is it for this Lecture 14, Eclipse Travels. In Lecture 15, we will talk about what conditions have to happen for a total eclipse of the sun.